We all agree that Hi-Fi Rush is a phenomenal video game. In an industry that constantly chases gritty realism and exhausting overcomplicated open worlds, Tango Gameworks dropped a literal lightning bolt of pure, unadulterated style. When the combat engine is firing on all cylinders and the licensed rock music is blasting through your speakers, it delivers one of the most intoxicating audio-visual power fantasies in modern gaming history. It instantly hooks you into a living, breathing Saturday morning cartoon where you aren't just controlling a character, you're conducting an orchestra of violence. You feel like an absolute rock god from the very first beat. And the brilliant thing about this game is that it doesn't just show you its tricks in the first hour and run out of steam. The deeper you push into the campaign, the more masterful and expressive the combat mechanics become. Take a look at the progression system. In most action games, visiting the shop means buying a passive 2% damage increase or a slightly longer health bar. But here, the upgrades you purchase here are entirely new directional combo strings and heavy hitting beat hits that completely redefine your expression in the arena. They are expensive, yes they are, requiring a serious investment of gears. But every single input feels distinct, purposeful, and mechanically heavy. You're building a customized repertoire of rhythmic destruction. Then you have the genius execution of companion integration. In lesser games, AI companions are an annoyance, something you have to babysit or an uninspired button you press to watch a cooldown bar reset. In Hi-Fi Rush, summoning your crew stops feeling like a gimmick and becomes a seamless extension of your own hands. You start dynamically weaving them into your active strategy. Peppermint isn't just a sidekick. She is your immediate answer to shattering blue energy barriers from a distance. Macaron isn't just a muscle. He is the heavy artillery you drop mid-combo to smash through armored Z-shields. Corsica comes in hot to manage crowd recovery and give you a window to plan your next tactical movement. When the game thins out the chaotic swarms and drops you into a pure 1v1 duel against masterfully curated bosses like Mimosa and Roquefort, the synergy is flawless. The required precision spikes, the visual clutter fades, and you are in a pristine, immensely rewarding martial arts dance where every perfect beat hit sends a jolt of satisfaction straight to your brain. You aren't button mashing to survive, you are executing a choreographed masterpiece. But look, even a near flawless game has areas where the gears grind a bit. For me, the friction shows up in the level traversal. Now I want to be clear, the platforming itself isn't inherently bad. It has some incredibly creative visual set pieces, especially when those cinematic quick-time event jumps kick in. The real issue is a fundamental mismatch in momentum. When you clear a high-octane combat arena, your adrenaline is redlining. But the moment you step into the connecting hallways, the game's electric pace drops straight off a cliff. You find yourself walking down long, basic industrial corridors, smashing crates for gear, and double jumping over standard platforms. And what really stretches out these moments is Chai's baseline movement speed. Outside of the battle, your movement is locked to this very deliberate slow pace. You can't sprint. In a universe built entirely on high-speed rhythm and perpetual forward motion, walking through empty spaces at a snail's pace actively pulls you out of the perfect flow state. It also feels like the game relies a bit too much on visual crutch during these segments, instead of naturally reading the 3D geometry of the room to time your jumps. Your eyes are constantly drawn away from the gorgeous world designed to stare at the flat 2D UI rhythm circle right in the center of your screen, waiting for the lines to overlap. It's not a deal breaker, but it does feel like the environment takes a backseat to the user interface between the fights. Where that pacing friction turned into a genuine mechanical frustration for me though was the difficulty scaling on very hard. The jump between difficulty tiers feels incredibly stark. On normal, you can comfortably breeze through these standard enemy waves in a single run. But on very hard, the challenge scales primarily through artificial statistics rather than a tactical AI behavior. They simply inflated enemy health pools and bloated their damage values until a basic chorus waves transform into a grueling endurance test. To make matters worse, the game's hyper-vibrant presentation, which is normally its greatest strength, starts working against you when the stakes are this high. In a massive swarm encounter, the screen becomes a war zone of sensory overload. Between the pulsing environments, flashing UI meters, health bars, and the bright companion assist effect popping off constantly, you get hit with a visual blindness. You aren't failing because your internal rhythm is off. You're failing because the sheer amount of beautiful visual noise completely crowds over the subtle enemy attack animations you need to survive. And that sensory overload is magnified tenfold by one massive mechanical omission. The game completely lacks a manual camera locking feature. In a traditional character action game, a lock-on mechanic isn't just a convenience. It's how you anchor your spatial awareness. But in Hi-Fi Rush, you're forced to constantly manual pilot the right analog stick while simultaneously trying to time your attack strings, deploy your companions, and read the rhythm. On normal difficulty, you can easily overlook this. But on very hard, it turns the arenas into an absolute nightmare. Because you can't lock your point of view onto a high threat target. Fast-moving elites will constantly slip out of your field of view. You will find yourself getting aggressively blindsided by devastating high-damage attacks coming from completely off-screen. It means you aren't just fighting the enemy's rhythm, you are fighting the camera itself just to maintain basic situational awareness. When a single unseeable hit from the behind can instantly end your run, the lack of lock-on feature stops being a minor quirk and becomes a major mechanical flaw. To survive this chaos and actually enjoy the game, I had to experience a bit of an ego death. I realized that banging my head against a broken, artificially inflated difficulty system wasn't proving anything. I intentionally dropped my difficulty slider down to normal, because my goal shifted from feeding my competitive ego to genuinely wanting to experience and complete the story. At the moment I checked my ego at the door, the entire narrative of my playthrough completely flipped. I realized that my extreme frustration on very hard wasn't just because the numbers were bloated. It was because I was treating Hi-Fi Rush purely like a visual action game. I was trying to use my eyes to react to the visual chaos on the screen. But this game is fundamentally an audio-driven masterpiece. The second I stopped relying on my eyes to predict enemy movements and started actively, strictly listening to acoustic patterns, the true mechanics finally unlocked. In the rhythm QTEs, the game gives you a flawless audio roadmap. There's a distinct acoustic signature and cadence to every enemy attack sequence. If you mute the visual distraction, hear the audio pattern properly, and log that sound sequence into your short-term memory, your hands naturally follow. You will rarely, if ever, miss a beat. By tuning my ears instead of my eyes, the game transformed from a frustration visual mess back into a pristine, satisfying rhythm dance. This audio realization completely saved the back half of the campaign. By the time you push past the halfway point and reach the spectacular, theatrical stages of track 10, the pacing undergoes a dramatic shift. The tedious, uninspired platforming filler finally begins to recede. The game leans heavily into what it does best: raw combat variety. The empty hallways shrink. The game trusts its combat engine to carry the weight. It all culminates into final track, where the game throws everything at you in an ultimate final exam against Kale. Defeating the head of the company requires absolute, flawless synchronization. By this time in the story, your parry completely takes over as a primary tool for the survival, rendering your early game dodge reflexes almost entirely obsolete. The sequence of your attacks, the timing of your deflections, and the precise, rapid deployment of your companions become mandatory to dismantle his defenses. Now, to be completely transparent as a player, as a final showdown, Kale wasn't quite as mechanically hard or as pure fun as I was anticipating. Fights like Mimosa and Roquefort felt a lot more masterfully thought out, curated, and tightly balanced. Kale felt a bit bloated by comparison. By crossing that final finish line, breaking his shields with your crew, and watching those final credits roll still delivers an immense, unforgettable feeling of accomplishment. So, where does that leave us when the music finally stops? Hi-Fi Rush isn't a completely seamless experience, but it doesn't need to be. There's a clear contrast between the electric energy of the combat arenas and the quiet pace of connecting hallways. But if you jump straight into a highest difficulty, the sensory overload and a lack of lock-on feature can lead to some real frustration. But the moment the combat engine hits its stride and you learn to play on its wavelength, those pacing bumps completely vanish. Its core strengths are so phenomenally executed, so bursting with charisma, and so mechanically deep that they completely carry the entire experience. It teaches us a great lesson. A game doesn't need to be completely flawless to be an unforgettable elite ride. If you want to experience this game the right way, skip the frustration of very hard on your first run. Start on the hard baseline to keep the stakes real, accept the slower pacing of the hallways, and most importantly, tune your ears strictly to the audio patterns rather than the visual noise. Do that, and you will find one of the most brilliant, satisfying rhythm action games ever to put onto the digital paper. Let me know in the comments how you handled the parry pivot. I'll see you in the next breakdown. Thank you.